Good morning, everybody. We'll be getting ready to start in about a minute, please. You can take your seats.
High-def camera stuff doesn't miss a trick. Haters? Those haters. Exactly. Don't say that. I'm sure I've got one hanging out right now. Hey, you know what?
Yes, I am. Although I'm worried on not much luck with ice.
Breakfast? Yeah, exactly.
Can you judge the time of the panel right in terms of the ice melt?
He's giving a little intro speech, and then I'll and then so perfect.
Shortage sharing agreement.
Thank you.
You can tell who's upstream.
Wyoming got our water first.
The upstream state.
Better to be at the head of the creek with the shovel than the bottom of the water.
Yep.
I thought.
You want me to go? Good morning, everyone. I'm Jim Broderick, the president of the association, and I'd like to welcome you all. We've all traveled from every point on the compass to gather in Las Vegas this week at the annual convention of the Colorado River Water Users Association. Foremost on everyone's mind is the drought contingency planning, which has touched off an intense discussion among the states, within the states over the past few months. The historic drought conditions of the last few years have intensified the need to find a collaborative solution. The challenges are greater than we believed when we negotiated the 2007 agreement. You'll hear from Reclamation Commissioner Brenda Burman that has issued a call to action to prevent a water shortage. We have gained valuable experience over the past decade, but it's now time to take the next step. Over the next 2 days, there will be many opportunities to engage in dialogue, explore options, and identify the potential solutions for the changes we are facing. But for now, let's reflect on the unique nature of CRWUA. In 1922, when representatives from the 7 states hammered out the details of the Colorado River Compact, suspicion, self-interest were on the table. They agreed that there was a need to share this valuable resource, the Colorado River. They agreed on the need for storage to divide the waters. They agreed that these decisions should rest with their own states and not the federal government. But the early delegates most likely did not imagine that the future representatives from their states would meet each year in a congenial atmosphere to calmly, and I use the word calmly, in quotes, to discuss and manage the Colorado River. Or that once in a while, innovative solutions come outside the compact or the law of the river might be found. The compact was forged almost 100 years ago. At the time, some thought the compact would only be in place for 50 years. The pace of development of the river within each state was a big unknown at the time. Developments over the years might change and needs might change. The compact had to be tweaked at some times and again adjusted to a changing world, but it has endured. This group, the CRWUA, founded in 1945, has become the laboratory of ideas on improving historic cooperation on the river. It is a group that can process ideas before they are exposed to the harsh light of the national political stage. It is about including all the interests of the basin, the 10 tribes who depend on the river, the obligation to Mexico, the lifeblood of those that live in the basin and produce the food of our nation, the immense recreational opportunities to be found all along the Colorado River, and those millions of people who benefit from the water exported from the basin. Here's the point. While we've made great stride in the past, such as the 2007 agreement, the real value for coming to CRWUA each year is building the relationships among people who view the Colorado River through different lenses. I'm thrilled to be a part of this process and to be your president. And yes, there are issues on the Colorado River which must be resolved. Yes, we do have a strong organization that will keep this discussion alive and lively for the rest of the years. And yes, we still have a lot of work ahead of us. But more importantly than everything else that we've talked about is we would like to welcome each and every one of you here, because without you, we would not be able to get the information across to the 7 states, Mexico, and the tribes. So it's with my pleasure and honor that we are starting to view a video of CRWUA. We will start doing this every other year and put out what CRWUA is so that we'll have information so the states can take back what CRWUA is. Next year we'll bring a video about Colorado, and we will start doing that for every state in the rotation so that we all will learn a little bit about CRWUA and a little bit about each other state. And with that, I look forward to you watching this 2-minute video.
The Colorado River. It provides water to 40 million people for agriculture, public health, and a vibrant economy. It is a vital part of the environment in the western states and Mexico. As the Colorado River Water Users Association, we understand the importance of this essential life source. Founded in 1945, the association is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization made up of nearly 1,000 members from throughout the upper and lower basin. We provide a forum for exchanging innovative ideas and perspectives about how to manage this natural wonder. Our distinguished membership is made up of water industry leaders who meet annually at the association's conference to openly discuss important issues and face challenges to the Colorado River. Please visit www.crwua.org to learn more.
We learned a long time ago to make things short so we could keep the attention span. So with that, I'm proud to start the conference, and I'll pass it over to Andy to start the panel and go in. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Jim. I'm Andy Mueller, the general manager at the Colorado River District in western Colorado. And before we start our panel discussion today, we have a very special speaker who's agreed to address the crowd, and the Commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation, Brenda Burman, who has just finished her first year as Commissioner. But while this is her first year as Commissioner, she has vast experience in the world of Western water and the Colorado River in particular. Her experience spans work for private and public entities, both in Arizona, California, as well as a stint as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Water and Science for the Bureau of Reclamation. And she also worked for Senator John Kyle as a legislative counsel. She earned her law degree at the University of Arizona College of Law, and a Bachelor of Arts degree from Kenyon College, where I met Miss Burman over 30 years ago as students. So with that, I'm hoping Commissioner is in the room. And she may be walking this way. I am going to maybe save some time while the Commissioner is hopefully coming. I'm going to introduce you to the rest of our panel. We have Amy Haas, who's the executive director for the Upper Colorado River Commission. Previously, she had been New Mexico's commissioner on the commission. She served as general counsel to the New Mexico Stream Commission and was the acting director for the Interstate Stream Commission as well. Prior to that, she was an attorney in private practice. And we're going to introduce the rest of the panel later, but Commissioner Burman is actually here. Come on up, Commissioner Burman.
You all are running early. But it's great to be here this morning. And it's great to be back at CRWUA again. So last year, when I was up here, I think I'd been sworn in for about 3 or 4 days. And coming back to CRWUA for my first act as commissioner, it felt like coming home again. And that was great. This morning, I am going to keep my remarks brief and to the point. You have lots of experts to hear from in the next several minutes and hours and couple days of CRWUA. But I have to say, as I look back on 2018, we have had one hell of a year. And I will say that it's not over yet. So the panels ahead this morning, they'll talk about the need for drought contingency plans to reduce the risk facing the basin, as we did at CRWUA in 2015, in 2016, and in 2017. I will leave it for others to discuss the elements and details of the DCPs again. But when I visited with you all last year, I identified 2 goals that we needed to be working on in 2018. And one of those goals was completion of the Tribal Water Study, a joint undertaking by Reclamation and the Colorado River Basin 10 Tribes Partnership. And I also identified completion of the Upper and Lower Basin DCPs to better protect our basin against the unacceptable risk of crisis and conflict. So for the Tribal Water Study, I am proud to announce today, after much hard work, the 10 Tribes Partnership and Reclamation are releasing the Colorado River Basin 10 Tribes Partnership Tribal Water Study. Thank you. This study was collaboratively conducted by Reclamation's Upper and Lower Colorado River regions and the member tribes of the 10 Tribes Partnership. These tribes, located from the headwaters of the Colorado and the Green Rivers to the border of Mexico, have diversion rights or claims to nearly 2.8 million acre-feet from the river or its tributaries. The Tribal Water Study was built on the scientific foundation of the Colorado River Basin Water Supply and Demand Study. The Reclamation published back in 2012. The study documents how partnership tribes currently use their water, it projects how future water development could occur, and it describes the potential effects of future tribal water development on the Colorado River system. The study also identifies challenges related to the use of tribal water and explores opportunities that provide a wide range of benefits to both partnership tribes and other water users in the basin. Last year, I think it was my 3rd or 4th meeting as commissioner, I sat down with the members of the 10 Tribes Partnership, and I heard firsthand how important completing this study was to each tribe. So I am very proud to be standing here today, proud of this study, of how Reclamation and the partnership work together, and this is a first-of-a-kind reference. I'm particularly pleased to hear how working together, brainstorming and problem solving, what we do best in this basin, we found a way to present the tribal views in their own clear, strong voices. The study report includes perspectives and positions from each of the partnership tribes related to Colorado River water use. This is really unique for a reclamation study. We believe that by doing it this way in partnership, we were able to get the most important information out there, published in a way that respects the views of each partnership tribe. I encourage you to read the study report. You can find it on our reclamation website, and there are electronic copies at several booths next door. I think that you will find this study to be an invaluable reference and an educational tool going forward. And that may be its greatest value, as a way to encourage greater dialogue, conversations, understandings here within the basin, among neighbors, as we face certain challenges ahead. It won't surprise you to hear that I believe we will succeed through working together. It is my sincere hope that today's release of the Tribal Water Study will help facilitate those collaborative successes. I now turn to the status of the drought contingency plans. Completion of the DCPs is a more complicated story. Last year, I stood here and asked the Basin states to complete the DCPs by CRWUA, by today. I also remarked that to be successful, the federal government couldn't want the DCPs more than the states and the water users themselves. In all honesty, there have been many moments this year that it did feel like Reclamation wanted it more than the participants. Because over this year, we have watched the harmony and disharmony in the basin play out across newspapers, on our screens, as national attention focused on our dry conditions in the Colorado River system and the efforts to complete the DCP in both basins. But I have to say, no one abandoned the effort. Even when we were wavering, no one abandoned that effort. Over the last 6 months, the effort has been impressive, and it is yielding results. In contrast, the latest hydrology information is sobering. Anyone who was hoping that a wet year would somehow bring us around needs to step back and think that that's not something that's going to happen here. After experiencing the 4th driest year on record last year, Lake Powell and Mead's combined storage sits today at 46%. That is the lowest level since 1966, when Lake Powell was initially filling and cutting off water supplies down south. To put it in more personal terms, these are the lowest reservoir levels in my lifetime. We are teetering on the brink of a shortage today, and we see real risk of rapid declines in reservoir elevations, particularly at Lake Mead in the very near future. With the current Powell inflow forecast at just 66% of average, Lake Mead is projected to decline to below elevation 1050 by the summer of 2020. That is just 18 months from now. It is time for us to pay attention. We are quickly running out of time. While we can't stand here together to celebrate completion of the DCPs this year, I can report that we are closer than we've ever been to completing the job. If I have one message for you all to take away from my remarks today, it is this: close isn't done. Only done will protect this basin. Folks that have followed Reclamation's pronouncements this year have seen our descriptions use strong language to describe the risks we face. Today's level of risk is unacceptable, and the chance for crisis is far too high. On the positive side, I would say there's much to be encouraged about. The basin states and water districts worked throughout the summer to produce draft DCP agreements. You saw those published in October. I want to thank the talented folks who produced those agreements, and we worked weekends and nights to put them together. and I want to thank the Basin leaders for the innovations and compromises that those agreements reflect. The Basin really came together on this one. In the Upper Basin, just yesterday, the 4 Upper Basin states, acting through the Upper Colorado River Commission, approved the DCPs and are ready to proceed. You'll hear a lot about that in just a moment. But they're ready to move forward as soon as the Lower Basin is ready to move forward. In the Lower Basin, Nevada is done, and California and Arizona are not. I have seen remarkable progress in Arizona this year. Arizona is crafting a consensus solution to approving the DCP among the tribal, agricultural, municipal, and developer sectors. And I want to be very sensitive to those ongoing negotiations. Reclamation has carefully worked to support all of the parties to help facilitate a consensus solution in Arizona. So I won't stand here and praise or press any particular entity or group. If Arizona is able to come to consensus, there will be ample time to recognize those who are willing to step up, compromise, and contribute. California also appears to be very close in finishing their negotiations or in closing their deal. I would caution folks, however, not to add unrealistic demands as we try to complete the pieces of the DCP puzzle. As I said before, close isn't done, and we are not done. Only done will protect this basin. In every effort that I've been part of in this basin, and I've been involved in many, our success has often had one common thread, and that thread is that deadlines matter. To date, Interior has been very supportive and extremely patient with the pace of progress at the DCP. But delay increases the risk for us all, and we need to ensure that the risks of lake levels declining to critically low elevations are addressed with or without the DCPs. Consistent with the practices of many prior secretaries and commissioners, I am here today to tell you all that we will act if needed to protect this basin. Here is our approach. If by January 31st, the parties to the DCP agreements in the Lower Basin have not finished their work to complete the DCP, the department will publish a notice in the Federal Register. In that notice, we will ask all 7 states for their specific recommendations for prompt departmental action. We will ask for actions to reduce the risks the basin is facing, and we will ask for actions that can be adopted prior to next August's 24-month study that will determine operations for 2020. If we go down this path, and I want to emphasize, this is absolutely not our preferred course of action. But if we do, we will give the states 30 days for their submissions. And the department will take those submissions and decide on a course of action before the August determination on 2020 operations. I know, we all know, that it is high time to wrap up these efforts. I sincerely hope that in early 2019, we are in a position to better protect all of the people that rely on this river, our shared resource. That's our job. Thank you all.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Burman. That was an inspiring speech. Hopefully will inspire more action by all of us here in this room. As I was beginning to say, it's my pleasure today to introduce the Upper Basin DCP panel, and it is a distinguished panel at that. I was just finished introducing Amy Haas, the Executive Director at the Upper Colorado River Commission. Sitting next to Ms. Haas is Commissioner Terrell from Wyoming. Mr. Terrell is the Wyoming State Engineer and has held that position since 2001. So if anybody's looking for somebody to blame for this extended drought, I think we have somebody. I think I'm done. Anyway, Mr. Terrell, in addition to being the UCRC representative or commissioner for Wyoming, is on the North Platte to Creek Committee, the Colorado River Basin Salinity Forum. He is a commissioner on the Bear and the Yellowstone River Commissions for the state of Wyoming. Sitting next to Commissioner Terrell is Eric Millis. I'm sorry. I couldn't quite see. I apologize. Is Tom Blaine he is the New Mexico State Engineer. He is New Mexico's commissioner on the Upper Colorado River Commission. He is the secretary to the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission, and he has 28 years of engineering experience. And next to Mr. Blaine is Commissioner Commissioner Eric Millis, who is the director of the Utah Division of Water Resources and is the Utah Interstate Stream Commissioner. And finally, last but not least, is James Eklund. He is Colorado's commissioner on the Upper Colorado River Commission. He is currently a private practice attorney at the firm of Squire, Patton, and Boggs, and formerly was the executive director of the Colorado Water Conservation Board. Thank you all for joining us. And what we're going to do today is discuss the DCP documents in the Upper Basin and in a kind of a question and answer panel format. But before we do that, I've asked Ms. Haas to describe to us the documents and the framework so that we have some basic common understanding in the room when we're talking, when the commissioners are giving us their insight.
Certainly.
Amy?
Thank you, Andy. It is a pleasure to be opening for these headliners today. I'm going to keep my comments fairly brief. A brief overview of the drought contingency planning documents, and I think hereafter I'm going to refer to them as everybody else does as the DCP documents. There are 5 core DCP documents, 2 in the Upper Basin, 2 in the Lower Basin, and you'll hear more about the Lower Basin's documents in the next panel, and an agreement that essentially combines or ties the 2 DCPs together. The 4 Upper Division states will be party to 3 of these. The first is the Upper Basin Agreement for Drought Response Operations at the initial units of the Colorado River Storage Project Act, or the Drought Response Operations Agreement for short. The second is the agreement regarding storage at the Colorado River Storage Project Act reservoirs under an Upper Basin Demand Management Program, also known as the Demand Management Storage Agreement. And then finally, the agreement concerning the Colorado River Drought Contingency Management and Operations. And this is better known as the Companion Agreement, and this is that agreement that I mentioned ties the 2 DCPs together. I'm going to briefly summarize both the Drought Response Operations Agreement and the Demand Management Storage Agreement. I'd also like to say that both of the Upper Basin agreements have in common their parties, the Upper Division states through the UCRC and the Secretary of Interior, and both expire December 31 of 2025 after the 2026 AOP is completed. I'd also like to say that apropos Commissioner Burman's comments, I'd like to reiterate that the 4 Upper Division states through the UCRC unanimously approved the final draft agreements at its meeting yesterday. So first off, the Drought Ops Agreement. Basically, the purpose of this agreement is to make operational adjustments or releases at the initial units of the Colorado River Storage Project Act, and these are Flaming Gorge, the Aspinall Unit, Navajo Dam, and Glen Canyon Dam. And this is in order to minimize the risk of Lake Powell dropping to elevation 3525. That is the target elevation in this particular agreement. At which point, when we drop to that elevation, we are dangerously close to elevation 3490, which has serious implications both for maintaining upper basin compliance with the 1922 compact, and it also has serious implications for the creation of hydropower and all of its attendant benefits. The Drought Ops Agreement authorizes development of drought response operations plans when and if modeling forecasts of Powell predict that it will drop to 3525, again, that target elevation. Also, the agreement importantly doesn't itself include a plan. Rather, it sets forth a process for establishing a plan based on modeling projections of Powell elevations. Moreover, any drought response operations plan will include a recovery component, and that's the recovery of storage, once a release to Powell is concluded or it's terminated. And then finally, any drought response operation must be consistent with existing law, including all environmental compliance at the initial units, and that would be biological opinions and RODs and so forth, as well as any water and power contracts. So moving into the Demand Management Storage Agreement. The objective of that agreement is really twofold. First, it permanently authorizes storage of conserved consumptive uses at Lakes Powell and the other initial units free of charge and permanently. It also sets forth minimum conditions for establishing an upper basin demand management program through year 2026, or excuse me, through 2025 to 2026. The agreement itself is premised on the facts that in order for demand management to be successful, multi-year storage is necessary. Also, without legally securing demand management storage space in the initial units, there's no point in investigating and developing a demand management program in the upper basin. Under the Demand Management Storage Agreement, storage is only available under two circumstances. First, if and when a demand management program is implemented, and secondly, for purposes of satisfying the upper basin's compact compliance obligation under the 22 compact. Importantly, and I can't overemphasize this, the agreement itself does not create a demand management program. Rather, it sets forth the framework for the creation of such a program. Before I pass it off to the commissioners here, I'm going to make a couple overall observations about the Upper Basin DCP agreements. You know, unlike the Lower Basin DCP, where we know what will happen when Meade hits 1090, the Upper Basin DCP, with the exception of this immediate authorization for demand management storage, establishes a process for Upper Basin DCP. For instance, again, the Drought Ops Agreement doesn't contain a drought response operations plan. Rather, it includes a process for development of one based on projections of Powell elevations. Similarly, the Demand Management Storage Agreement does not establish a demand management program. Rather, it sets forth the minimum conditions that must be satisfied in order to establish such a program, the condition upon which any storage of conserved consumptive uses may occur. And with that, I think I will turn it over to commissioners.
Yes, I have a few questions.
Okay.
So I wanted to ask.
Wait a second. I didn't sign up for questions.
Yes, no questions to you.
Okay.
But I do have some questions for the commissioners, and I think it probably cannot be emphasized too much that the people sitting up here on this podium today and their staffs actually made the DCP in the Upper Basin happen. The day before the deadline, they voted to unanimously approve that, and they put forward a significant effort and went through lots of internal state processes and lots of external interstate negotiations, and we greatly appreciate that in the Upper Basin, the work that these folks have done. I want to start with Commissioner Terrell and a question kind of really coming from the Upper Basin perspective on why we're doing this. Because what I hear frequently in the Upper Basin is that the imbalance that we see in the Colorado River is truly actually being driven by overuse in the lower basin. And many people in the upper basin say, well, why would we ever engage in something like demand management or worry about these drought operations on our reservoirs? Why are we doing this, Commissioner Terrell?
Thank you, Andy. Well, we're on the same river. The obligations, the uses, the drought that we've seen don't stop at Lake Powell. There may be overuse in the lower basin that is part of this. The hydrology we've seen, I hate to admit, since I became state engineer back in about 2001, there is one good reason to retire, perhaps. Can affect us as well. Our interests are in the river as a whole and the water that is available for our pre and post compact uses. But number one is regardless of what happens below Lake Powell, our non-depletion requirement does not go away. And that is a requirement. It is a bottom line item that we need to meet while we protect our uses. So all of these agreements, and I'm not going to revisit the detail that Amy went through because she covered them very well. That's really what they do. They set up an ability for us to manage our water, and if we get into developing a drought contingency or a demand management program among the upper basin states that complement each other, then we can actually reduce our uses in a voluntary, compensated way, rather than have to visit the curtailment side of the compact where we have never been, and that's where we'll be in a crisis mode if DCP isn't completed. So those are my points. I think it's critical. I mean, in either case, whether we regulate, and frankly, we do it every year. I have a whole staff that does nothing in the summertime but essentially go out and regulate people after a call for regulation. We know how to do it. We don't know what it looks like as 4 states try to do it at the same time in pro rata amounts ahead of time so that we don't violate our non-depletion requirement. Why not, if the head gates are going to be off anyway, if the pipelines are going to be off anyway in a shortage, why not do it in a way that lays most lightly on our people? That's what demand management does. That's what the drought contingency plan does. And it allows us to maintain those uses and maintain compliance with that important 22 document.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Terrell. Are there other comments from any of the other commissioners on this subject as to why the Upper Basin is motivated to be involved in these documents, in these efforts?
Take a stab at that one. Thanks, Andy, and thanks, Commissioner, for your words. We, in the Upper Basin, as Pat put it very well, we are joined at the hip with the Lower Basin. We can't operate the system as 2 distinct basins with autonomy. They're interrelated to the point where that would be folly. The Commissioner's words were insightful and heartening because, well, first of all, to be in this room and to have so many female leaders at CRWUA in the water community, I think deserves a huge hand. Amy. And we can learn something from the 10 tribes that got the work that the Commissioner outlined done ahead of schedule, or on time, maybe even ahead of schedule. And we need to be doing that type of work with that type of energy and passion on the drought contingency plan effort that she articulated. In the Upper Basin, we have to have the relationships with the Lower Basin that we've cultivated over the decades in rooms like this one in order for us to all realize the river's full potential. We're all better off if we move together than if we move separately. And, it's the old Abe Lincoln, which I get accused of looking like, unfortunately, but we all, a house divided cannot stand, and that's true in this basin.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Eklund. Mr. Commissioner Blaine, do you have a comment on this?
Yes, Andy, thank you. I think Pat made a very important point.
stating that the river is a system. It has to be managed as a system. But we have to have coordination of the management of that system between states. New Mexico is not unique and unlike any of the other three other upper basin states. We administer our water internally. But this document will bring together the collective efforts of that management and use it as a tool to protect the basin as a whole, to protect the river system and to ensure that levels are maintained at Lake Powell.
Well, thank you very much. My next question is actually for Commissioner Millis. Commissioner Millis, as we heard Amy describe these documents, and I know you know them extremely well, they are truly process-oriented documents. They're at the upper basin level. They don't contain that granular level of hydrologic accounting and the specifics on water banking that are present in the lower basin draft DCP. Can you dive into that a little bit? Explain why that is, that our upper basin documents are so process-oriented. What do we need to do further after we do have these documents fully executed?
Sure, and I think you know, the fact that these documents between the upper basin and lower basin are so different, it goes to the fact that the basins are really configured differently and operated differently. I would think that one of the major differences is where the storage is located. And for the upper basin, our storage for compact compliance is located at the end of our system, so below all of our uses. And for the lower basin, it's the opposite. Their Colorado River supply and their storage is above. And so I think with that, the lower basin's able to gauge fairly accurately, measure more accurately, and understand its water supply in a given year better than the upper basin is. Our storage consists of what is left over after our uses and what actually flows on down to Powell. And so our efforts in the lower basin really are to assure that we are able to maintain our compact obligations and avoid this curtailment that has been talked about this morning. Amy talked about the two components, the two principal components of the upper basin plan, the drought response operations and the demand management. And the drought response operations is the one that we see as being process driven. And the process involves looking at the Bureau's 24-month study, seeing how the hydrology is going to be going. If it appears that Lake Powell is going to drop to this critical elevation of 35-25 within a couple years, we start monitoring and doing things that help us evaluate and look at that a little bit more closely. If things keep going and it appears that within a year in that 24-month study that the most probable hydrology would show us dipping below, then we start assembling the plan. We start looking at the hydrology as it is at that moment and how it is projected to be, and make the plan. And so it really is something that is based on the current health and the projected health of the system, and so it will be somewhat fluid that way. The demand management program has been noted. The DCP documents allow for its creation, but that actual plan has not yet been assembled. That's something that we need to be working on. We've talked about some of the terms that would be included in that, but not the specifics yet. So that is one of the things that we still need to do. So I look at the Upper Basin's plan as more process-driven. The Lower Basin plan as being more of a trigger-focused, a task-focused type of thing. And both basins obviously have work to do, but we will continue to work on all of these plans and be able to make them so that we can address the needs at the time that they need to be addressed.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Millis. I appreciate that. It was a very thorough answer, excellent answer. Is there any other points, any of the other commissioners or Amy you'd like to add to that excellent explanation? Seeing none, next I want to ask a question of Commissioner Blaine from New Mexico, and it has to do with the drought response operations agreement. And as I understand it, that contemplates moving water from the three initial upper crisp initial reservoirs down into Lake Powell to protect that that critical elevation. What I guess I want to understand is that that's moving as much as 2 million acre-feet of water down into Powell, and that it appears from the statements and in the documents that it's contemplated that that can be done without any major federal action or new NEPA analysis. And I wanted to ask, how is that possible, and how do we envision that operating in such a way that those lengthy federal permitting processes will be avoided?
Thank you for that question, Andy. Our collective staff between all of the Upper Basin states have been very diligent and very creative in crafting a plan that will fit within the existing guidelines and the existing biological opinions and the NEPA process that has already taken place on the 4 CRSPA initial units. And we will ensure that the operations and releases to meet those demands or those target elevations at Lake Powell fit within the existing documents. We all know that the NEPA documents have been very specific in what kind of releases. For example, in the Navajo Reservoir, there are target flows that have been identified in the NEPA documents that can sustain a wintertime release of water between 500 and 1,000 CFS. Those will not be exceeded. We will be able to operate any releases from the reservoir within those guidelines.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Any other insight on that from our commissioners? Commissioner Terrell?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. And he's right on. I think, too, that part of the social and economic side of what we're doing in the Upper Basin is taking these documents to our public, our water users, our members in the basin, and their appetite, I believe, for how we operate those reservoirs is somewhat satisfied if we stay within those existing documents. Certainly, one thing we know is Reclamation will move this water anyway. They have that authority whether or not we have a DCP. So it's important that this document, which gives us a seat at the table, if we can stay within existing rods and existing authorities and don't have to redo all that work, there's some comfort in that operating in this way is not a new normal. It is an emergency operation under existing guidelines if and when we need it. And I think the ability for the upper states to essentially get agreement on that point was helped by the fact that we are staying within those guidelines.
You know, Commissioner, you just made an excellent point, and that has to do with the primary purpose of those initial crisp reservoirs in terms of compact compliance for the Upper Basin. And do we as an Upper Basin really need federal legislation to empower this drought operations response on those reservoirs? Is that a critical thing for us in the Upper Basin?
Well, as a first answer to that, the legislation for drought operations, no, we do not need that. That can happen and probably will if the need arises. Why we need legislation is because the Upper Basin Plan and the Lower Basin Drought Plan are a package deal. The legislation that's necessary for the Lower Basin then we can use to help authorize our drought storage for demand management, among other things. But really, I think the legislation, while not needed for drought ops, certainly is needed as part of the package deal so that this is a 7-state step forward.
Excellent, thank you. If I can now turn to Commissioner Eklund, I want to talk a little bit about or hear your thoughts on the demand management agreement and really understanding that this agreement sets the platform for the 4 states to develop their own programs or the program within the UCRC, but then each state needs to develop internally its own way of doing that and performing a demand management program. Can you talk a little bit, share with the audience the steps that you see are necessary both at the UCRC level and then maybe at the state level?
Thanks, Andy, and it's great that the question's coming from Andy Mueller, the head of the Colorado River District in Colorado, because this is a topic of conversation that's been very much discussed in Colorado over multiple months in probably hundreds of meetings around the state. And we have had no stronger partners in that discussion than the Colorado River District, the Southwestern District, the Front Range Water Council entities, really Southeastern, everybody that in Colorado comes together at this conference, came together to have conversation prior to this conference that was very much spearheaded and led by the very capable, excellent staff at the Colorado Water Conservation Board and their director, Becky Mitchell and Brent Newman. So we have, I think, a parallel process that needs to move forward with respect to the answer to your question. We'll have intrastate questions and items that need to be covered and discussed. We'll have interstate matters that need to be addressed. On the interstate level, we on the Upper Colorado River Commission need to give the state's guidance on the macro interstate time, place, and amount questions that I'm pretty sure every engineer and water lawyer in this room is probably thinking of in real time when they hear about this topic of demand management. So those are interstate questions that we would need to address. And like I said, in parallel, we'll need each state to roll up their sleeves and stand up a demand management program that is specific to the needs and concerns of the water users within each of their states. So Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, Wyoming, we all will have some different types of work that we'll need to do and programs that we'll need to stand up with our own contours, but they all need to talk to each other. They all have to have, we're fortunate in the West, especially in the Rocky Mountain West and the Colorado River Basin, to have water law that it's roughly the same language. It's not, maybe we speak different dialects and it's hard to understand each other sometimes, but for the most part, we're operating on a common platform, and I think that will lend itself nicely to interstate resolution of some of the guidance that will need to come out of Amy's office and the Upper Colorado River Commission.
Okay. Great, I appreciate that, Commissioner Eklund. Anyone else with thoughts on how their state or the UCRC what kind of process we should look forward to as water users in the Upper Basin? What do you? We have a significant number of them here in the room. What should they be expecting in your states and through the commission? Anyone want to chat on that one a little bit?
What should they be expecting? I don't know yet. The documents outline the framework, as James explained, within which demand management can occur, but I just want to emphasize a point that he made, and that is we can get into pretty good wrestling matches between the Upper and Lower Basin. Been a little one this year. However, if we get to the point where demand management is critical and we have to put it in place, the 4 states of the Upper Basin have to have a program that talks to each other, that looks like one another, so that we are not throwing rocks back and forth across the Wyoming-Colorado border, and instead have trust in each other that when we are managing our demands and providing conserved consumptive use, that water truly is there, and that Utah and Colorado and New Mexico trust our calculations and vice versa. That's how we comply with the compact, and that's how we avoid the intramurals that might otherwise happen in the upper basin that we don't need.
Well, thank you.
You know, I just want to emphasize too that the upper basin has struggled with this issue over the last few years. And how do you really account for, and how do you really track, and how do you really ensure that wet water appears where it needs to appear? And we seem to be coming to a consensus on how to do the accounting and really measurements and really what the effects of a program will be. Have we developed that solution as of today? No, but we're still in the same room, sitting on the same side of the table.
Commissioner Millis.
Sure. And for the state of Utah, you know, we understand that the states will probably not do their programs all exactly the same, yet the effect at the end ought to all be the same. But some of the things that we obviously need to be working on in the state of Utah is figuring out better ways to estimate our uses, our saved water that would come out of a program like this, the evaporation losses, how we shepherd the water, and those sorts of things. Those are important discussions that we'll need to be having within the state of Utah.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I have another question. It's a little bit, I realize we have a panel with 3 engineers and a lawyer, 2 lawyers, excuse me, Amy. And so this is a little soft and squishy, but let's talk about the cultural and political shift that demand management represents, right? In the Upper Basin, you know, roughly, you know, we have this paper entitlement in the compact to about 7.5 million acre feet. Says we get that. We're actually not using about 3.1 million of that is not currently consumed in the Upper Basin. How do you bring your stakeholders along in the states that you represent to agree to use less water when in the legal documents we actually have an entitlement to vastly more water than we're using? How do you bring that cultural shift within our states?
So it's a tale of 2 basins. I think Director or Commissioner Millis put it very well. We've got the lower basin, has the largest human-made reservoirs in North America, sitting right up above them, metering out water as they demand. The upper basin has a reservoir, but it's our snowpack, and it's decidedly inconsistent, as you've all seen. Our users understand this dynamic, and I would say, Andy, you being a representative of one of them, have stressed that they crave the certainty and the flexibility and the resiliency every bit as much as our lower basin partners do, and it makes it challenging for us to have to adjust on the fly. We don't know how much each state was truly entitled to until after the water year is concluded, and we kind of do an autopsy on the year, and we figure out how much we were applying the percentages that each of our states has set forth in the Upper Colorado River Compact. So it's a challenge for sure, but we operate within our means, and it's created I think a spirit of innovation and creativity in the Upper Basin that otherwise might not have ever been fostered.
Well, thank you. I'm wondering for some of the other states, James and I have been involved in the intrastate discussions, which at times get a little excited and other times are well handled. And I wonder, in your states, in New Mexico, Wyoming, and Utah, are there, how are your water users contemplating this reduction in demand management? And what does it mean in reducing their consumptive use? Are you getting pushback from your water users in those states?
Well, in New Mexico, we've always had plenty of water. Yeah, culturally, our state has been in training for DCPs for the last 150 years. We have been able to craft legislation and programs that talk about shortage sharing agreements and alternative water management alternatives. You know, we are not unfamiliar with this process. We do need to have a program, though, that adds structure to this process for the DCPs, and that structure has got to be able to address, you know, the very difficult issues of accounting. You know, what really is being conserved, and how are participants in a program like that compensated? So those are issues ahead that in New Mexico, I think we've got a pretty good start in solving some of those problems.
Okay.
So we went through several years of the System Conservation Pilot Program, which appears to me to be a precursor, kind of a practice run for a bigger demand management program, and so that's where our focus would be now, is to now go towards that bigger demand management program. I think we saw increasing interest over the years that this System Conservation Pilot Program was operating, and people starting to come around to that. I think you know, we would try to capitalize on that momentum and go forward at a time that is appropriate to do so.
I'll just add that, much like Eric, our experience is largely informed by the System Conservation Pilot Program that started in 2015, and I will be the first one to tell you that we had much more acceptance of that program in Wyoming than I ever thought we would. That does not mean we haven't had some pushback or some people that don't either understand it or maybe just don't like it, and that's fine, that we understand that. Water rights, especially the old ones, are often viewed in essentially religious terms in many of the upper basin states, and it's anathema to these people to say, don't use your water right. Let the water go. We will, even if we pay you, it's not in their DNA to let that happen. And yet the people that signed up, the participation, even in some sense, the enthusiasm that we saw beginning in 2015 surprised the heck out of me. That is a cultural experiment, and I think largely that's what the System Conservation Pilot Program was. Can something like this even work? I think we found that it can. It may be imperfect as a pilot program. We got to kick the training wheels off and turn it into a demand management program that's fully fledged. But I think we will cross that cultural divide in some manner. I don't know that we'll ever get 100% interest in it, but I think we have enough to go forward and see if there's an operational program out there.
Great. Well, Amy?
Setting myself up here. I wasn't going to jump in, but I can't resist. We're talking about the SCPP, which the UCRC administered in the Upper Basin. And, you know, a lot of that pilot was really a proof of concept in terms of whether we had a market and whether we had interest, as Commissioner Terrell just described. We also included aspects of lessons learned from the pilot into the Demand Management Storage Agreement. One of the essential or central tenets of that agreement is we need multi-year storage to even make a dent on Powell elevations. And the way we get that is through this storage authorization. So that's a very direct lesson learned, as it were, from that pilot program. And I think that was a very valuable exercise whatever we do in terms of demand management storage and setting up a program, standing up a program, I think we're going to really pull from some of the information we gain from the pilot for sure. And, we're realizing that in the agreements themselves.
Andy, back to Colorado for just a second. What we've, I think, witnessed, and I know the River District has had a front row seat and been very involved in this education, is that culture is a evolving thing. And while there are certain aspects of water that are baked into our DNA, there are other aspects that the more educated our water using community and just people in general in our taxpayers in our states are, the more they understand that this is a serious situation that deserves their time and attention, even if it is kind of counterintuitive to them to turn water past their head gate. That's one of my clients that's a multinational likes to say there's there's big deals, and then there's big damn deals. And that is where we are right now with this river. We've got a lot of hydrologic uncertainty facing us, and we've just got to be able to move forward as the commissioner directed us to as one basin and figure out a way forward on it.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I want to touch on some of the specifics, and one of them that I hear from the lower basin, and I believe you've heard in some of the 7 basin states, commissioners, is the concerns about verification. There's a concern in the lower basin that we're going to color water that's not truly conserved consumptive use water, and we're going to claim it and stick it in that storage account in Powell. And so the verification that this is water that would have otherwise been consumed but for this demand management program is really critical to us in between ourselves and the upper basin. It's critical to the Bureau. It's critical to the lower basin. What is being done at the UCRC level to really nail down the ability to verify? And this is a question for any of you if you can speak to it. I think that's a really critical element to success of this program. So how are we handling that?
I could take a stab at that and then chime in, commissioners and Amy. We have been doing a lot of work over the years on consumptive use analyses. So we've, as everybody in the room knows, you've got multiple ways in which you can measure consumptive use. Blaine-Criddle, modified Blaine-Criddle, Pitman on teeth. You've got multiple technological advancements that have occurred with satellite imagery, and we've got to get our arms around that, use the best available science that we can to make sure that we're measuring consumptive use in a way that is understood and agreed upon by all of the states. So that would be one piece of work that is kind of a baseline, a necessity that has to be in place for our programs to really be effective.
Great. Commissioner Blaine?
That was a pretty good technical answer from an attorney.
Yeah, I don't know where he learned that term, modified Blaine-Criddle. I don't think that they taught him that in law school. So.
I picked it up. Okay.
That is, even with internally in the states, we look at different mechanisms to measure consumptive irrigation requirements and what depletions really are. And that is something that is not going to be a line in the sand that we can ever cross. It's going to be a continually developing process and a refinement that's going to have to take place. And if we had to give you an answer today, the answer would be, I don't know. When in fact is we don't know today, but the things that we do in the future will help move us in that direction. We can use all the technology and the processes that are before us now and come up with a solution. But that solution may have to be organic and modified to really accommodate and reflect reality in a huge river basin system.
And as we move into the future and our water supply becomes tighter in terms of use, in terms of what climate change might do, we've just got to have better information and better numbers to make the decisions that we've got to make. And I know the lower basin wants to be sure the upper basin is verifying and able to account for all the water amongst the upper basin states. We want to be able to verify and account for all the water amongst ourselves, but the water users in our states, as well as the water managers and our water regulators, they want to know and have that verification. So it's pretty broad that, you know, the desire and the support and the need for the verification of the better information that we've been talking about.
If I could add one last concept, and I'll go to Andy's very first point, which is why not just say, trust us, we save the water? Well, at the end of the day, that just comes back to hurt us. If you think about it, the whole purpose for conserved consumptive use is to put water in storage that we can later release in lieu of curtailment and maintain compliance with the 22 compact. If that water is not there, what suffers is compact compliance. So it's every bit as important that we can verify that the water we're saving makes it to Flaming Gorge and Lake Powell and Lee Ferry at the end of the day, and a shell game at the beginning is absolutely unfruitful at that end point, because that's why we're doing it. The whole reason we're doing it is to avoid the curtailment, get the water there. We have to show it's there. We got to convince the lower basin and interior and ourselves and our users that what we're doing is for those purposes and is effective. We have learned a couple of things. In the system conservation program, for example, in Wyoming, a number of our programs were partial season fallowing, or where we let them irrigate, or they chose to irrigate the first part of the season, then turned off their canals. There is a continuing consumptive use that occurs even after that canal turns off. And so how much was truly saved? It might be that verification takes us down a road that shapes what the program can be. Maybe there will not be able to be partial season fallowing. I don't know. That is one thing we've learned. It's what we'll continue to study. But really, I think the point is we're verifying it for our own very selfish purposes.
Just a quick postscript on verification. As a member of the drafting committee, I can vouch that the verification issue was a hotly debated one. And I think as a practical matter in terms of the DCP documents and agreements, I mean, there are two safeguards, as it were, for verification and accounting. I mean, the first is that the Upper Basin will enter into an agreement with the Secretary on verification and accounting methodologies. And then the second overarching, I think, takeaway or outcome is that we will consult with the Lower Basin on any terms of a demand management storage program, including verification and accounting of conserved consumptive uses. So I think those are kind of the two outcomes of those sometimes painful, often painful, always friendly, though, negotiations. So.
Right. Well, excellent. Well, I want to thank Director Haas and the commissioners for being up here today. I really appreciate your insight. Thank you for being here, and really appreciate, look forward to hearing what the Lower Basin has to say about what they're doing. So, thank you. And I believe we have a 15-minute break at this point.